The world today is not gentle. It is not soft. It is not particularly designed with your peace in mind. In fact, if you look closely, a lot of modern life seems almost engineered to keep you tense, distracted, and slightly dissatisfied. You wake up and are immediately asked to look at a screen. You are handed a flood of bad news before your mind has even fully arrived in the day. You are compared to strangers before breakfast. You are told to be productive, but also to relax, to build a future, but also to stay present, to care deeply, but not too much, to be ambitious, but not arrogant, to be authentic, but also marketable. And when people feel overwhelmed by all of that, they start believing a dangerous thing. They start believing that misery is the natural response to modern life, that if they feel heavy, they are simply being realistic, that if they feel numb, they are just adapting, that if they feel exhausted, the exhaustion is proof that the world has become unbearable. And yes, the world has become harder in many ways. That part is not a lie. Costs are higher, attention is more fragmented, relationships are more fragile, people are more isolated. There are real pressures everywhere. But the mistake happens when we take those pressures and turn them into a total explanation for our inner life. Because once you do that, you stop being a participant in your own mind and become a victim of your circumstances by default. You give the outside world full authority over the inside world. And that is where misery becomes self-reinforcing, not because the world is good, but because you stop noticing your own agency inside it. A strange thing happens when life becomes difficult for long enough. The mind does not only try to survive, it tries to predict. It starts scanning for threat everywhere. It starts interpreting neutral events as negative ones. A delayed text becomes rejection. A quiet room becomes loneliness. A hard week becomes evidence that life is failing. And suddenly the problem is no longer just the event itself. The problem is the frame through which the event gets processed. That frame is where suffering multiplies. Two people can live through the same external pressure and have very different emotional lives. One person can say, "This is difficult, but I can still respond." Another can say, "This is proof that everything is broken. The event did not change, but the meaning changed." That is the core issue. A miserable life is rarely created by misery alone. It is created when the mind repeatedly narrates the world as hostile, hopeless, and out of reach. The brain becomes a machine that turns friction into identity. And this is where so many people get trapped. They are not just tired, they are not just overworked. They are stuck in an ongoing mental translation of life that says everything hard is a sign that I am failing and everything easy will not last. That kind of thinking feels mature because it sounds realistic, but it is often just a sophisticated form of helplessness. The mind is trying to protect itself from disappointment by expecting disappointment everywhere. And once that becomes the default setting, the world can be full of opportunities and still feel empty. It can be full of people and still feel lonely. It can be full of progress and still feel like nothing is happening. That is not because the world has no goodness left in it. It is because the mind has become too practiced at filtering goodness out. One of the darkest features of modern life is that it does not just create stress, it creates comparison. And comparison is one of the most efficient ways to poison a human being without ever touching them. You look at someone else's success and immediately convert it into a verdict about your own life. You see someone else's relationship and begin interrogating yours. You see someone else's body, money, productivity, confidence, or freedom, and suddenly your own life feels like a lower tier of reality. Social media did not invent comparison. Human beings have always compared themselves, but it industrialized it. It made comparison constant, ambient, and unavoidable. There is no off switch unless you intentionally build one. So now the average person spends their day not just dealing with their actual life, but also with 10,000 invisible reference points they were never meant to carry. That pressure changes the nervous system. It creates a baseline sense that you are behind. And when you live in a state of being behind, your mind stops tasting the present. Everything becomes a missed deadline. Even success becomes stressful because now it has to be maintained. displayed, defended. And under that kind of pressure, people become miserable in a very modern way. Not dramatic misery, quiet misery, the kind that looks functional from the outside, but internally feels like running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. You keep moving, but you do not feel arrived. You keep achieving, but you do not feel relieved. You keep consuming, but you do not feel full. Because the deeper hunger is not for more things. It is for a mind that can stop measuring itself against a million imagined versions of what life is supposed to look like. And then there's the deeper psychological trick. The world trains you to stay externally focused, so you never notice how much of your suffering is being generated internally. That is the uncomfortable part. Not all pain is self-created, but a lot of misery is self-amplified. The more your mind is filled with noise, the more helpless you feel. The more helpless you feel, the more you look for something outside yourself to blame or fix. The more you blame the world, the more passive you become. It becomes a loop. Hard world, overwhelmed mind, distracted attention, reduced agency, more misery. But if you interrupt that loop even slightly, something changes. This is why people can live in terrible conditions and still maintain a kind of inner strength, while others can live in relatively comfortable conditions and still collapse emotionally. The difference is not denial. It's not fake positivity. It's the presence of an internal stance that says, I do not control the world, but I do control how much of it I let inside me at once. That is where the real battle is, not in pretending the world is fine, not in gaslighting yourself into being cheerful. The battle is in refusing to let every external pressure become an internal identity. Because if the world is harsh and your mind also becomes harsh toward itself, then you are being hit from both sides.
But if the world is harsh and your mind remains clear, then you have a place to stand. That place is not comfort. It is not ignorance. It is clarity. And clarity is a form of protection. It helps you see that some things are actually terrible, some things are merely inconvenient, and some things feel catastrophic only because your mind has been trained to panic before it understands. That distinction matters. It can mean the difference between a life that slowly decays under constant psychological sabotage and a life that is difficult, yes, but still livable, still meaningful, still yours. So is today's world designed to make you miserable? In one sense, yes. It rewards distraction, comparison, overstimulation, and constant dissatisfaction. It profits from your attention being fragmented and your peace being fragile. But in another sense, the world does not need to be perfectly designed to make you miserable, because the human mind will do part of that work if left unattended. That is the brutal truth. Modern life gives the mind more material than it can cleanly process, and then asks it to function as if nothing is wrong. That is why so many people feel like they are losing themselves without any single obvious collapse. They are not broken in one dramatic moment. They are worn down by accumulation, by repetition, by low-grade psychological leakage. And the answer is not to pretend the world is easier than it is. The answer is to become more intentional about what you let shape your inner life. Less automatic comparison, less mindless ingestion, less outsourcing of your emotional state to whatever the internet, the news, or other people are doing today. More attention to your own mind, more recognition of how your thoughts are being generated, more willingness to slow down the mental machinery before it turns every inconvenience into proof that life is hopeless. Because the world may be trying very hard to take your peace. That part is real, but misery is not destiny. It is often the result of a mind that has forgotten it can filter, interpret, and choose. And once you remember that, even a hard world becomes less capable of owning you.